you think about, you've talked about kind of big global issues around decentralization, more localized ministry, more culturally contextual ministry. You've also talked about the ministry of the local church, reaching out to the community, dealing with what it will be like after COVID, really figuring out how do we invite people and return people to the touch of the church. So when you think about all that you said, what sort of leadership gets us there? What sort of leadership do you hope emerges in the next decade?
I think there's two things I would love to see stronger in our leadership for the future. And one is not a new thing, but a very old thing, namely a Wesleyan approach to salvation, to ministry, and to theology. That's sort of classic Wesleyan. I'm very much a Wesleyan myself, and we all like to see ourselves reproduced. But the other one, which is equally important, is a way of approaching ministry where you're always curious about what God is doing now or doing next. Because I think the mission theology people who says that it's God's mission are right, and that he is never lazy and he doesn't stop. And one of the major tasks of leadership is to understand and observe what God is doing and get the church involved in it. So an approach to ministry where you're always curious of what is God doing now, and get involved with that.
And it sounds like you're also saying being able to inspire other people to be involved in that and to equip.
Yeah, to tell the story of what God is doing and invite people to get involved. Exactly. Yeah.
So how will what we have learned from ministry during the pandemic change our models of leadership? Do you think that in terms of what we thought about leadership being, that it will change because of what we have learned from the pandemic?
Yeah, those are really, really big questions. I've tried to ponder on them, and I've come up with three things I think I want to give as my answer to that question. I don't know exactly how these models are going to look for the future, and I don't presume to be able to describe them. But I think we can turn it around and says there are things that we must rid ourselves of. We must rid ourselves of models of leadership that forgets that we are fragile and need the grace of God and each other. That's models of leadership that can't do that. We can't use them in the future. And secondly, I think that we've got to rid ourselves of models of leadership that ignores that we must have community and not be torn apart. We need each other. And models of leadership that will divide us or separate us in any way, they're not useful to us. They don't help. And lastly, I think that we could do well in ridding ourselves of models of leadership that cannot adapt to new challenges and therefore becomes a burden to the people and to the people of God. So those would be my three things.
That's wonderful. I mean, certainly the pandemic has taught us how fragile we are. We may have thought that we may not have known that before this pandemic, but we are indeed fragile, and the need for community and connectionalism, which is at one of the hallmarks of Wesleyan theology, an idea of we are better together, we are stronger together. And then this whole idea of being able to adapt to change, because we have been constantly, it is the one constant, is that things are changing, and to grow, we've got to change. So there is one question that has been in the back of my mind. Tell me about the 3 gospel choirs and how that developed in your church. I certainly don't think that most people in the U.S. would know that, or would think that a church in Copenhagen would have 3 gospel choirs. But tell me about that.
Well, in the late 80s, early 90s, a choir director, classical trained choir director from my church, spent half a year in the U.S. He was a classically trained organist and composer, but once he got to the U.S., he got very, very interested in African American gospel music. So he spent his time there studying that, and then he went back home, and the youth choir we had at that time in the church, he was the leader of that, and he changed that into a gospel choir that sang exclusively African American gospel music. And together with other factors in the Danish society, some Americans living here as well, he started what became a wave of gospel choirs, so that there are 180 to 200 gospel choirs in Little Denmark today. And 3 of them belong in my church, and it has been a cultural phenomenon over the last that period, the 90s and the first part of the 21st century that we have experienced. Gospel music has been very popular as choir music.
And I know didn't one of your choirs perform at a general conference?
Yes, the gospel choir KEFAS has performed twice, I think, at general conferences, and were invited to the last one as well, but that didn't occur. And the other choirs have also traveled, one of them also to the US, and had the great experience both of traveling and visiting United Methodist churches in the US that were predominantly white, and singing as a white choir African American gospel music in their worship services, and even more exciting, visiting black churches as a white choir singing African American gospel music, and being very, very anxious to understand how that would be received at all, but were welcomed to an enormous degree with great hospitality and enthusiasm. So they have had great times, both in the U.S., in the United Kingdom, and elsewhere in Europe. So that's part of the story about the gospel music. His name, the founder of these choirs, is Peter Steinvey. He's a great man.
That's wonderful. And I believe we heard a gospel choir when the Connectional Table met in Oslo, Norway.
Oh yes, there's gospel choirs in most European countries today.
Yep. It was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Well, is there anything else that I haven't asked that you would want to say?
No, I think that we're good.
Okay.
Thank you very much.